5 after, so we might as well get started. This is our first SCIM interest group meeting after our IETF 111 Birds of a Feather meeting. So we have lots to talk about. We have a sort of a proposal for an agenda, but let's do some quick agenda bashing and then we can move forward. We have the notes. Let me just re-put that HackMD link. So our collaborative note taking happens in HackMD and it's here. It should now be in your chat. And what we thought we would do is just go over the Birds of a Feather. Nancy, if you, I think since we have a chair here, we could kind of get your impression of it and then have people add color based on their, their pieces. Would that work for everyone? I'll take that as a yes. And then I think we want to have Paul and Matt specifically go over the Padlet and make sure we cover the feedback that we got in the BOF, since that could really affect our charter and where we want to go with charter. Are there any other agenda items that people want to add or things we want to discuss today? Okay, sounds pretty good. The link to our notes from the BOF are now in the they're in the notes for this meeting, but I'll also paste them into chat. So you can take a look at them live. Actually, I think you need to authenticate to get to those notes. So it might be that what we want to do is display them for everyone to read, rather than assume everyone can get to them. Can somebody confirm who was not at the Birds of a Feather that whether or not they can get to that CodeMD link?
Hi, Pamela. This is Chris and Eno SailPoint. I cannot get to the notes.
Okay, so
yeah, you need to set up an IETF account in order to be able to get to it. So,
oddly enough, this is West Dunington. I can get to them, and I don't believe I have an IETF account.
Interesting.
Okay. Oh yeah.
I didn't ask you to authenticate, Wes?
No, it just let me in.
oh, then I stand corrected.
Maybe you need a HackMD account? Could that be where you logged into HackMD? Is it some kind of derivative? Okay, well, we'll leave.
Sorry, yeah, I can confirm that I can get to the IETF org link. I think I had problems using the OneNote in the meeting agenda.
Ah, okay.
Seemed like that was a different link.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
the OneNote thing is not accessible to anybody outside of Microsoft.
No, I can get to the HackMD, but I have a HackMD account, so
Yeah,
you just need a HackMD account.
Yeah, the OneNote piece is an artifact of the fact that I sent the invite for this list for Teams, and it is all Microsoft-y, so apologies for that. I don't actually know how to delete the OneNote, and there is no data in it. So yes, I'm assuming that if we can charter and we get more into IETF land, that we will be using more typical tools, and this goes away. Okay, so I think that's it for agenda then. If we can get to the point where we talk about next steps in the charter, I think that's important. Nancy would also love your opinion on, I think we need to know exactly what our next steps are and should be once we sort of talk through. But I want to make sure we synthesize everything from the BOF.
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you want to give a sense of how it felt to you, Nancy?
Absolutely. So, I guess I am a longtime IETF participant, having chaired successfully several BOFs into working groups. I can tell you this was one of the better BOFs where there really was no controversy. And that's my personal read of it. So from the feedback that the group received, the reason why I say it went reasonably well is there wasn't any strong opposition to challenge the need for the work, right? So, and that's pretty obvious as you look at the note. There was more of a challenge on the charter itself, what the scope should be, how narrow, how broad. And so that's really the next steps, is to get that buy-in and consensus, if you will, on tightening the text of the charter. I will tell you from the IETF process, typically it takes the second BOF. Very rarely, so I should say it the other way. The IESG frowns upon continuing of a BOF, right? So typically by the third, if you don't get it, you're out. I don't foresee that from the feedback that Roman form the group and actually reinstate the group. Because I think we're leaning towards leaving SCIM as a name as opposed to forming SINs, right? Unless you guys really object, but then you have to provide us with a strong rationale to sway for the creation. But that said, I think Roman is actually willing, if we can get consensus through the mail list, he's willing to reinstate the group without us having to even go to a second BOF, right? So that's good news, number one. The suggestion is for you to start, because I didn't see this meeting being announced on the SCIM mail list. So this is to say, it would be good for you to start doing the communications through the IETF SCIM mail list.
Yes, so I did send a notification, but it was today, so it wasn't, you know.
Okay.
There was not.
Yeah, I did see the notification. I just, you know, since I signed up for the other one, I wasn't sure where it went to. But so IETF rules is they prefer a 2-week notice when a meeting's about to occur. If you have the cadence, I think it's fine, Pam, if you just send out the announcement of this is the cadence in which you run, provide the meeting information, and, you know, doing a reminder, hey, we're about to have the interim. I think that's totally fine, right?
Okay. Yeah, we have, you know, we have basically a calendar link that people can join, like people can subscribe to so that they get the meeting cadence. And so, yeah, every 2 weeks, what I have been doing is posting just before the meeting to say that this particular meeting is starting. And then, but I think it would be very easy to just have something a little more automated reminder. Would that work better for folks anyway? You know, the other thing we have not been doing is posting agendas ahead of time.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something better.
I haven't been seeing email, so I don't know. I didn't see one from you this morning.
You didn't? Okay, we should check that out.
I received it, and I agree with I think automation's a good idea, Pam. I don't know what you use for that. I've got a personal Zapier if you want me to help you spam the mailing list.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I have sort of been assuming that what we're doing here is sort of off, you know, slightly more informal and off the cuff, and that we would have to tighten up our formalities moving forward. So, you know, whatever that form takes, we'll make sure that we get it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, once the group gets reinstated, Pam, you're going to force one of us chairs. If Roman decides to keep us as chairs, you know, but whoever becomes the chair effectively runs the meeting, and we are expected to put the agendas and to post the meetings and so on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think what you're saying is we would have help on that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. And I don't know, is there a sense, I would be interested to know for this group, because I think some of this group, this is some of their first IETF work. Is there mentorship opportunities here? Like, are there folks here who would like to sort of learn how to do that chairing work? Because, you know, if that's the case, I'd love to set that expectation. You know, it'd be great to have this sort of new group of folks come into IETF and you know, emerge fully qualified for future stuff.
And we highly encourage that, and it's really up to the ADs, right? So it's up to Roman to decide who he wants in the I don't know what you call it, the official officers list, right? Yeah.
Okay, great.
Pam, I'm new. I wouldn't mind learning wherever I could, as long as it's helpful and useful to people and not a detriment to the process.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. So maybe Nancy, what we can do is have you, I mean, there to me, again, I'm sort of dealing with my half knowledge of IETF compared to full smart knowledge. You know, I think there are opportunities for editorship and opportunities for chairing. And, you know, I think we're going to want to have some sophistication in this group for all of it. So it might be too that editor roles are another really important option here.
Sure.
Okay, great. Nancy, are there other observations that you want to make or recommendations for next steps?
No, I think, you know, my only recommendation is that we start pushing forward towards tightening the charter language.
Right.
Because, you know, we'll have to look at the new cutoff dates. If we can get the consensus through the mail list, as I mentioned, Roman is willing to take it up to the IESG and IAB, so that by the time we meet either virtual or in, I think, Madrid, is that the November meeting?
Yeah.
That we could be an official, right, working group.
Okay.
So either way, we can plan on, you know, either the BOF, but all of this is gated by the chatter effectively that happens on the mail list. So most of the work really gets done in the mail list, and the formality is to discuss it, you know, at the face-to-face or the virtual meetings, if you will, as we did in the BOF. But even when we take the consensus calls in these, you know, meetings, we always confirm it on the mail list.
Okay, so we need to be more formal about the fact that these are consensus calls that we're making, I would say.
Yep.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. Is there any problem with us using this sort of informal interest group meeting to
Not at all.
this? Okay.
Yep, it's encouraged. Yeah.
Okay, great. So in that case, let's switch to the sort of the next piece here, which I think would be to talk through exact feedback that we got, and maybe Matt and Paul to talk about the Padlet, because I think that was one of the major mechanisms for you know, talking through consensus. So if you want to take it away.
Yeah, Matt, are you online there?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and my screen share coming through okay?
Yes.
All right. Let's see. So if anyone wants to, I can't see the chat window now, but maybe Matt, if you can drop the URL in the chat so folks can go
Sure.
do this on their own screens if they don't if they don't want to be bothered with my screen share.
Yep, I'll do that now.
Thanks. I'm not a Microsoft Teams expert, not by a long shot. Well, first, I would love just some feedback on how this worked. Maybe folks have used this tool before or not. Did you guys find it engaging, you know, interesting? Was it helpful?
I thought it went really well. It was neat watching the little hearts light up as the conversation went on.
Yeah.
I thought it was great too. And I liked how people could make comments anonymously, but then they got called out to speak up. But I thought that was great.
Yeah, you could stay anonymous if you really wanted to, but it was harder.
Yeah, I mean, Paul,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, my network is unstable, so I'm always gun shy here. I think it worked well coming in as the BOF as my first interaction with this group. I caught on quickly, but it might have been helpful to upfront say, you know, here's the Padlet, and we're going to vote by interest. Even before you showed Padlet, I mean, I caught on pretty quick, but I thought it worked well overall. That was just my only feedback.
Great.
Right.
Thanks, Mike.
But then it may have been me just showing up late. You know, that's normal. So.
No worries, man. No worries. I can admit this now that I stole this from my son's third grade teacher. So this tool is a tool that they used in their third grade class to keep a bunch of third graders engaged with the material, and it apparently it works equally well with industry folks.
That's great. And so there were a couple of things that were created. Like most of these, I think we went into the meeting with most of these panels in place, right? We
did, yeah. Matt and I, we made that decision intentionally to avoid it becoming a sort of free for all, because in the chat, in the whatever Meet Echo chat, there was some really good discussion about other topics potentially to add to it, but we wanted to at least get judge interest around the topics, Pam, that we've been discussing now for a few months, and I think that we did it. I think the number of hearts here sort of broadly indicates that we're thinking about some of the right things.
Yeah, and just for folks who weren't there, I think the highest attendance I saw was 64 folks, which I think is pretty good. And so, a vote, 17 votes out of 64, I think, and that includes bots, and a few people who had both Jabber accounts and normal accounts. So, I think these vote numbers actually represent quite a large percentage of those who were there as well.
Yeah, agreed. So just looking at some of the specific feedback and jump in here anytime, Matt, with anything you've got on your mind as well.
Before you get to that one of the things that was interesting to me was that we had 65 attendees and 15 of them said, hey, I'm already using SCIM, which is great because it's interesting, though, that there's a lot more votes on some of the things that are wanted than we have who voted on these first two tiles about being an implementer of SCIM already, or, hey, I would use SCIM if it had some additional functionality. So anyway, I think SCIM is working, is what I guess is what I'm saying. It's not, there's so many standards, I think, that don't get implemented. I believe SCIM is one that has been.
Yeah, I think the stats that Phil was showing were also indicative of that, which was great to see. So let's see, on the schema one, I think this one was saying let's be careful about being too didactic about the schema layouts. I think that's what this one was saying.
There was a discussion about schema where I can't remember who it was, but they were saying, look, rather than have a hard schema, would it be possible for me to just kind of dynamically add something to the schema if I need a place to store it? And a little bit, kind of have some of this kind of a schemaless aspect to SCIM. And I don't think that showed up in the Padlet. It was just discussed.
Yeah, that was Leif, I think.
Okay.
That made that observation.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting comment that was made, and I was thinking about it after the fact, because I think it was coming up in the context, being like the common denominator for, I don't know, education or something like that, or based on the different types of schema, or maybe it's HR. But on the other hand, I was thinking, well, how do you interoperate if you don't have a common schema? Then do we fall into the attribute mapping situation forevermore? And I was wondering about if we build it, would they just adopt it because it's already there, as opposed to defining their own schemas for these things?
Yeah, and I think the comment here is trying to propose a solution to exactly that, which is to have discoverable schemas, which, there may be like a best practice schema, but if the server doesn't follow the best practice schema, maybe there's a discoverable schema, or maybe in addition to the best practice schema, there's a discoverable schema as well.
Right. That's the way I took it too, Paul, is that we might be able to make the schema discoverable, and that would allow people to start with some of the standard base schemas, and if they wanted to add additional attributes to that, and expect that those would be interoperable sometime, that they could be made discoverable. Like if you needed to add a social security number to a user or something like that, you could just do that.
Could we, so can we call that work item an investigation into discoverable schema? I mean, I think that's a good catchy term to talk about a possible milestone where we're, so essentially this becomes, we're a part of our schema project, right? We're not just going to look at creating templates then, we're also going to look at this extension mechanism.
Yeah, I think if there's interest in that, it'd be nice to know. And there's a way of describing schema in SCIM, kind of a schema definition language that we could just reuse.
Does that
So, yeah.
does that kind of thing though? It definitely, I think, makes a lot of sense. But does that confuse having a defined schema if you get half the industry going with a set of kind of common extensions to a named schema and half not? And predicting interop before you actually try to do interop would be difficult.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some pluses and minuses. As a discussion item, something that we want to, as a working group, decide, I think it's worth having on the agenda. And Absolutely. We can bring up questions just like the one you've just brought up.
I mean, my sense is that we should investigate it and we should come out of it with an approach, right? And whether that, that approach might be that, the discoverable schema, for example, is only good for optional attributes as a, just guess as to what might come out of it. But I think that the question that might be, is the group committed to doing that investigation? Like, do we find it worthwhile to go and look?
I'd say definitely worthwhile.
Yeah.
Do we want to vote? Do we want to get a consensus?
Oh yeah, how do we do
vote?
this? Is this a consensus?
Should we just raise our hand if we agree that that's something we want to add to our charter?
If you're not familiar with Teams, there's a little picture of a happy face with a hand in front of its head, and you could click on the drop down there to raise your hands, and then it will actually count. So you can see under the people icon at the top. So we have 6 right now. And our sum total people are, let's see. So we've got 11 folks here, 6 raising their hands. So we do have, okay, so let's notate that. So we'll get 6 out of 11 is in the consensus call. And I'm going to say that the question is for investigating discoverable schema as part of a schema, as part of our schema milestone. Is that acceptable to folks? Okay, we got 7 out of 11 now. Okay. And then we need to make sure that this then goes to the list also and ask for consensus there. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, and I might ask the channel Roman what the outcome and milestone would be, right?
Right, okay.
So research isn't sufficient. He'd want to see something more.
Okay, so we would need to investigate and we would need to make recommendations.
Provide like a recommendations or
okay.
Some document, right?
Okay, so deliverable would be a document containing recommendations.
Yeah.
Delivered to the working group. Okay. All right, so I do have the specific text of the consensus call then in the notes. I'm just going to put it in the chat in case folks can't get to it. And by the way, I think Parul, you were saying that you couldn't get into the Padlet. Are you okay seeing it on the screen? I just want to make sure.
I am able to access it now. Thanks for checking them.
Okay, so I'm just putting in the chat what I wrote in our notes as far as what we voted on. And that's what I will send to the group. So if anyone wants to tune that now or change their vote, now's the time. All right, look at us doing consensus calls. Okay, let's keep going.
Matt, I feel unqualified to talk about pagination, so I'm going to let you address this one.
Right. So I think we can talk maybe about pagination and synchronization possibly at the same time here. But yeah, so in pagination, I think there's just generally interest in understanding these use cases and deciding how we're going to handle the return of many results. So there was a hope, at least there still maybe is a hope, that we can look at the use cases for pagination. Why is it that people are receiving such large result sets on their queries, and maybe find a better way or best practice way of getting fewer results. Maybe that's a better UI pattern, or maybe that actually is a synchronization case, which I think we can talk about in a sec. But I think that there would be enough interest in talking about that topic, given the number of likes and some of the comments.
I had never thought about the relationship to synchronization.
Well, yeah. So do you want me to go through that real quick?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so the reason why I think it relates to synchronization is that for whatever reason, clients seem to want to have, and I think there's some good reasons. Clients want to have a copy of a result set, and they want to keep it up to date. The most common scenario for that, I think, is an application wants to be able to use objects from SCIM in their authorization model, the application authorization model, before the users ever log into the application. So consider a very simple application where, you know, you're sharing things with other users. You want to be able to share it with somebody before they ever log in. So that means your application can't just rely on the authentication event in order to determine users that can be granted access to something. They actually have to call SCIM and get a list of users. So when it comes to enforcing authorization, you don't want to go and have to at every authorization opportunity or enforcement event, you don't want to have to go and make another SCIM call in order to assure that that user exists or that that user is a member of a particular group. So the clients keep a copy of what's going on in SCIM local to the application so that they can do really efficient authorization enforcement. So the reason why pagination factors into this is that they need to be able to get their initial load of users and group memberships into the application. And that can be a lot of users and a lot of groups. And that's what a common use case for pagination turns out to be, is I got all these things coming down to me, I need to page through them. And then subsequent to that, the most difficult use case is, what if a group membership is deleted or a user is deleted? How do I detect that? And in SCIM right now, the only way to detect some of those events is to get the full data set and compare it to what you previously had downloaded. So if there were an easier way to do synchronization, to Pam's question, then maybe you wouldn't have as many of those really heavyweight queries in order to maintain the consistency of your local client cache.
Yep. Can I update on this? Because I did a lot of synchronization with applications, not with SCIM, but a lot of times the initial load was loading up the employee's accounts on a new application. So for that, you're downloading a lot of data. And then subsequent to that, you need to do synchronization where you have new employees, employees terminated, they change jobs or they change titles, things like that. That's the update. That's the synchronization part that you need. And we would do that asynchronously, but before they log in. So that was a really important piece that we had to work on.
Makes sense. And if anyone wants to correct any of the notes I'm taking here, feel free to hop on that HackMD.
Right, one of the things that came up on the discussion that I put into the Padlet was that if we wanted to, sorry about the background noise, if we wanted to make sure that we, one of the synchronization strategies was, could we come up with a mechanism that would allow us to indicate that a change had occurred, but did not reveal any information that an unauthenticated listener could get into. So it wouldn't leak any sensitive information, but it would indicate that, hey, you need to call back as an authenticated user and get these changes. That pattern seemed like a really interesting way of attacking the synchronization problem. It may not completely eliminate the need for pagination, though. You might get a change notification for a group membership change and 40 new group members were added, and you might want to page those.
Yeah, I mean, I think keeping these as two separate but interrelated interests is important, because the thing that excited me about the pagination was, frankly, the much more powerful filtering capability. While recognizing that synchronization is certainly an important thing, I still liked it for what it was in terms of the filtering.
Agree. Yeah.
So you're saying that advanced filtering will also reduce pagination? I just want to make sure I'm parsing that.
Well, you would turn a lot less records with the more advanced filtering,
Right.
certainly.
Right.
If you haven't synchronized.
So I think the goal of the pagination discussion would be to determine, one, whether or not we need pagination at all. If we can eliminate pagination because we've figured out a way of getting the initial load for synchronization case and subsequent changes to that data set can be communicated efficiently. And also if we have better filtering capabilities and we can eliminate pagination, it just sort of like makes a lot of stuff go away for us. If we decide that we want to keep pagination, then we can talk about the implementation of pagination that would allow for cursor-based and index-based backend systems. And I think that allows for a spec that requires pagination for well thought out reasons. It allows people that are implementing it more flexibility to implement it on various backends that may not support index offset-based pagination.
All right.
I would be happy to lead that discussion.
Right. I mean, so I think what this does is widens the milestone and the work effort, right? Like, I think we do have to treat these things as sort of both related to core, right? Like, it's not just an extension the way that we're talking about it now. It's a core design pattern that we want to document, right? And maybe that's just implementation documentation, but I don't think we know for sure until we understand the design pattern we prefer.
That's right. I think that we would have, it could go two ways. One, and Phil was, and I discussed this at length, I don't know if Phil's on the call today, but it could go to, hey, for a best practice that avoids the need for pagination, use these more efficient queries, I guess, or more precise queries. It also might include changes to the core if we decide that we need to implement something like cursor-based pagination.
Right, okay. So I think we probably want some kind of consensus call out of this too, right? I'm going to just put some text in here. So what I want to do is document the conclusion that we just came to and make sure that everyone agrees with it, right? That we can't just look at pagination by itself, right? That this is going to widen out the milestone into a core study on how implementers use, sorry, I'm writing as I'm talking, how implementers use paginated requests, right? For synchronization purposes, right?
Are we blurring the boundaries between, say, synchronization and pagination? Because I think synchronization is much more, because synchronization itself, we can have multiple patterns. For example, an identity provider may bear the onus of synchronizing all the changes to the relying party. That could be one pattern. Another could be that the identity provider simply publishes the events and the onus is completely on the relying party to listen to those events, and then like making sure that the events are received in order is always a hard problem, right? So I think that becomes like a bit challenging. Third could be that identity provider simply has endpoints and the relying party is supposed to call those endpoints, in which case we need efficient endpoints to query delta changes, say changes since a timestamp and things like that. But then again, the onus is on the relying party. And based on my experience, I think putting more load on relying parties might not be efficient. But I think a lot of this goes into the synchronization story.
Right.
But I think we are also discussing part of it in the pagination story.
So is this just a question of sequence? Do we need to talk through patterns, how people are using, how implementers are synchronizing before we talk about pagination and filtering, in order to understand those patterns? So we could document those patterns.
Yeah, I think if we had a really good proposal on the table that people were agreed would work for this common use case where clients want their own close to the application data set and keep it synchronized, then we could go back and eliminate that as a use case for why pagination is necessary. So we may decide that we still need pagination for our initial load, or we might decide that we change the core spec for an initial load for that specific use case of synchronizing.
Yeah, and I think the nuance got lost from my comments was that I do see scenarios, and I think that's what Pearl was talking about, where there is no synchronization explicitly, and things are done by making queries that are filtered and paginated. So I do think we need to support both universes, one where people synchronize and another where they synchronize via effectively these filtered queries.
I tend to lend my support to that thought too. I think it's a both type of situation, not an either or.
Okay.
Makes sense. All right. So I think that then the consensus we're driving towards is the idea that we believe that synchronization use cases will drive almost certainly a combinatory, it's a terrible word, but sort of a joint approach to both pagination to filtering, right? But that we need to understand we need to document those sync use cases first. Does that work as an approach?
I mean, with my limited understanding, so to say, I strongly feel that there would be a need for cursor-based pagination. I don't think we'd be able to eliminate pagination because of multiple kinds of use cases which are there between identity providers and relying parties. So we don't want to limit the feature set, or so to say, hey, there is no further support for pagination in SCIM, because we believe that all the use cases are addressed through these nice synchronization related things. So I strongly feel that both would coexist. However, it does not harm to first explore the synchronization space and the use cases, and then see whether we have really a return on investment to enhance the pagination specs, or would it be like a small feature set that we need to throw in there rather than making it like a really big change, or multiple features as part of pagination.
Right.
Well said. I like that.
Agreed.
Okay. Okay, so then I think, are we okay to go for a consensus call that basically says we will, again, explore synchronization, like implementation patterns around synchronization, and put together, again, I think it's a document, right, that defines the patterns as essentially an initial milestone before we start talking about some of these large data set, possible protocol changes.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll type that up. 1 second.
Yeah, it seems like people are pretty eager to express their, give the ideas that they have for that synchronization use case. The one that came up on the BOF, I thought was a really interesting approach. So going to be some good discussion there, I think.
One of the things that came up on the BOF was this notion of notifications, and it's coming up as part of the synchronization topic, but do we want it to be a separate topic entirely, like this event handling capability of detecting events on the data as opposed to the whole data?
I think it's essential. Everything that we had, any changes to, in this case, an individual's information needs to be a notification of some kind, somehow. I mean, we did it through a measure queue, but that doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. So should we expand this charter?
Well,
add a notification item.
My hunch is that becomes the implementation method to achieve the synchronization related use case, right? So I think, if we
Yes.
stick with these sort of things as use cases, the event triggers, or if we end up adopting the existing event, the SCIM events draft, whatever. I think that just ends up being the implementation method for the use case around synchronization related functionality.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
What we did was just notify there was a change, and then it was up to the application to figure out to fetch the details of that change.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets down to what's the payload in the event, right? Does the event payload include the actual change, or just an indication of change, right? That you have to then go authenticate and figure out like that. So I think we can leave those as for discussion. But I think there's definitely, it feels like there's lots of interest and desire around putting something in place in the spec around this.
Right.
All right. So let me see. So the consensus call I've got right now is more about the sequencing of synchronization as a prerequisite, really, to having these other conversations, and the description of a deliverable, right? Is that enough? Is it enough for us to say we're going to do that synchronization interaction first? Or do you want us to structure that consensus call to be slightly more broad? Because I think all of this richness of everything we're talking about here, about how they could all interact with each other, is great. I just don't know if it needs to go into a voting call, but I want to make sure others agree.
Well, I want to defer to Matt's experience and expertise here, but it feels like the pagination and synchronization related functionalities probably should be discussed sort of in the same context. Otherwise, we risk like two subgroups going off and solving problems in different ways that really should be solved sort of together. But again, back to the use cases, I think that I think Parul did a great job of explaining exactly why pagination is still going to be necessary, even in a future where we have some sort of synchronization capability built into the spec. So it feels like pagination, synchronization related functionality, and event, whether that's events or something else, plus the result filtering part of the pagination use case, like all that stuff sort of all belongs together, and may have lots of implementation details and best practices, but probably belongs in sort of one deliverable, my hunch. Matt, your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think Parul said it the best. I don't think we'll be able to get rid of pagination. And I think to the extent that we can't get rid of pagination, we'll need to be able to allow implementers to use cursor-based pagination. That's just been our experience, having implemented roughly 52 of these service providers in front of different databases. But it would be helpful to eliminate the synchronization, not eliminate it, but have a consensus around how synchronization is happening, so that it doesn't become a red herring when we talk about pagination.
Yeah, that makes
plus
sense.
one to that, I also feel that, same single work group looking at both of these would make like a lot of sense.
Yeah, they certainly need to be aware of each other.
All right. Wes, I just want to make sure that you don't have a hand up to speak, that it's a legacy hand. Did you want to?
The legacy hand, I did not.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure we weren't ignoring you. All right, so I think the consensus call that I have in the notes is going to be applicable. We could add something to it about the importance, the continuing importance of pagination and filtering and large data set handling, if you prefer. So let me just put it in chat here. And I want to make sure the plus ones in chat got into the notes. Are we happy with that as the consensus call that we want to vote on?
Yeah, maybe that's the headline, right? Is large data set handling, right? It feels like large data set handling covers pagination, result filtering, and synchronization related functionality. So maybe that's the headline, is large result handling.
There was something that was mentioned earlier that I thought I heard regarding pagination that I just wanted to put out there just to make sure that I'm validating my thoughts, which was the thought of handling multiple changes, like let's say you changed every user's email address in the system, you've got millions. Like, would that be paginated? Queuing all of those changes?
You're talking about input pagination?
Yeah, like if you have a large amount of data that's coming for you because there's been a trickle of events that's happened, that all this data is now changing. Kind of related to the idea of the initial identity seeding thought too. That's another large data set, but that's like a
right.
change set, not a read set.
I think it comes under batch processing.
Yeah, batch processing.
Is that right? It's a good question. So do we consider batch processing do we paginate batches? That's a really good question.
This does seem like part of it's a bulk operation, merger of two companies into one. So you're updating 50% of the email namespace. It still feels like a synchronization problem, fairly related to initial load. There are trends towards that. Like, it's uncommon to happen, but you need to handle it.
Right. I mean, I doesn't sound like anyone strongly feels one way or the other, so it might be something we just need to investigate. I mean, I can honestly say I have no idea what the rules are today in the spec for large, like, I don't know if there are size limitations or paging.
Yeah, like that's what I'm wondering, is like, would you get like a denial of service or something if you're having that many SCIM requests happening at once, or would you want to start batching them together into like a paged size load and saying, well, we'll handle X amount of data in a given request or whatever, and paginate it or start automatically paging those together?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if the REST spec even allows for pagination on put and patch operations. I don't know if it does or doesn't. Obviously it does for get operations, but I don't know about put and patch.
I think, so can we all take an action item to go talk to our various folks that, that might have an opinion here? Like, I can go back to the Microsoft developers and find out what we do. Like, we are a SCIM client, so, and I assume we are doing those kinds of big pushes. So, I can commit to going and talking to those folks. Can we make that an action item for next week to follow up?
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. And then I think, so I'm just going to add an action item section. We're almost out of time here, so I just want to make sure we review. So I think we need to actually vote on the consensus call, right? So next week, I think we need to look at what the email response is to the results of the consensus call, as they go to the list. And then this one, hear back on batch processing and whether there are pagination implications or, any kind of synchronization implications. Okay.
Would this all be shared on the SCIM mailing list, and are we all again supposed to, like, chime in with our thoughts there just to make sure that this is recorded, or the hands up today and that consensus building was good enough?
Yes, that's exactly the goal. So I'll make sure it gets posted right away. Yeah, having people, I think we want to try and seed that discussion to try and bring in more people from on the mailing list. So you're absolutely right. So
Okay.
having your thoughts posted there is going to be super valuable, I believe. So excellent suggestion. All right, so are we okay to vote on this consensus call as written right now? Any objections to this consensus call? Do we feel like it represents the right question to ask? Are you voting, Matt, or did you have a comment?
I was voting, sorry.
No, that's good. It's fine. Just want to make sure. All right, let's vote. All right, so it looks like 7, 8, 9 out of 11. That's pretty good. Okay. All right, I think we can call that carried locally. I'm going to move that consensus call down in the notes just because that's when we did it. 9 out of 11 is the final. Okay, well, I feel like we did lots of useful things today. Is there anything else we want to cover before we hop off? Oh, did Nancy get kicked out?
Yeah, I think the last two that we had on here, the external ID and the privilege access management, also received a lot of votes and a lot of good discussion during the BOF call, especially the privilege access management one. I think that I tried to capture some of the notes here, but there was a lot of neat echo chat about those ones. So do we want to do a quick consensus on those ones? Do you want to save those for next time, Pam? What are your thoughts there?
I think, Nancy, you could weigh in here. I mean, I would rather only send 2 consensus calls, I think, to the mailing list so that people don't feel overwhelmed. Is that a good idea, or are we just unnecessarily drawing things out?
Yeah, I think it's every group works differently, and I apologize. I lost connectivity, so I missed the last 3 minutes of the conversation. But literally, you can put as many questions as you want to the mail list. I would presume that you would be the core participants. So I don't know how much Leif and Morteza will continue to chime in. Morteza had one sticking point that he voiced during the BOF. And I think that was with regards to the scope creep. But anyway, so Pam, if you were asking of, 2 or more, I think either way is fine. It's the question of, when you look at the timeline, it's the question of how do you get the agreement, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So then I think
I need a minute.
I think we can, I mean, I'd rather not draw it out. I'd rather try and get this charter done as soon as possible. So the question is, well, do we need a consensus call for those 2? Was there any contention on the external ID or the privilege access management piece that anyone heard?
I think Leif's comments were about IoT devices and whether we were going to expand SCIM to cover IoT devices. And I think that would be a significant scope expansion, but I didn't get the sense there was pushback on either of these last 2 during the BOF.
Okay, so maybe we can skip on the consensus call. I do think Morteza's comments were about the synchronization piece, if I remember correctly. And then I think it was Robert Moskowitz, I think. Yeah, who talked about the IoT.
Well, Bob will always talk about IoT. Sorry.
But I mean, do we need to explicitly declare it out of scope?
I think we can for now, right? Like, this is something that we could always adopt later or explore at a later charter, right?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I am going to informally ask for opinions then on external ID, privilege access management, and IoT when I put the 2 consensus calls out so that we can have discussion on it. And we'll see where we go. Does that work for everyone?
So are you going to put those out as separate items?
I will put them out as just asking for commentary rather than as consensus calls that get voted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that work?
So Pam, I'm trying to figure out, I don't know how it works in a BOF, but typically it's the chair that puts out the consensus call.
Oh, even better. Okay.
Well, not really. This is a BOF. So that's where I'm trying to, I'm not going to nitpick because we're still forming the group. The way I would just suggest you phrase it is, we had this interim meeting, we had this agreement. Does anybody in the mail list disagree or have comments to add? Because we're working on tightening the charter, right?
Okay. Maybe Nancy, what I'll do is I'll send you just a draft of what I plan to send, and then we can make sure that it's not boxing us into a corner or making assumptions.
Sure.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. I'll stop recording now.
Thank you.